Hi, thanks for clicking on this video. We're here at Trinity Wesleyan Church so that we can unleash hope to those around us, and that includes you. So thank you for being a part of what's going on in our church, even through technology. We hope that this video is a blessing to you, and at the end, you're going to see some next steps and ways that you can get involved even after this video is done.
Some things only look weird because we have gotten used to what is broken. Praying to a God we cannot see. Giving when the world tells us to grab more. Saying no when everyone else says yes. Choosing holiness when compromise would be easier. To the world, it may look strange. It may even look weird. But following Jesus was never meant to blend in. He called us to a different way. A better way. So maybe the question is not, why are Christians so weird? Maybe the question is, what if weird is what faithful looks like? Weirded Out. A series about the strange and beautiful life Jesus calls us to live.
We are continuing our series called Weirded Out, where we're looking at the ways following Jesus will sometimes make us look strange to the world around us. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." The world has patterns, it has rhythms. The world has ways of thinking that become so normal that we never stop to question whether they are healthy, whether they are wise, whether they are biblical. We see everyone living a certain way, so we assume that must be how life is supposed to work. One of the most deeply established patterns in our culture is the belief we should always be doing something. We should always be producing, we should be achieving, earning, we should be building something, we should be improving something, we should be posting on social media, we should be answering phone calls, we should be responding to emails, we should be planning our calendars, and we carry calendars filled with commitments. We keep phones beside us so that we can be reached at any moment. Like we answer work emails at night. We check messages before we get out of bed. We tell people how busy we are, almost as though busyness is like a badge of honor. When somebody asks how we're doing, we say busy. And we might be exhausted or overwhelmed. We might be anxious. Sometimes people are just holding everything together barely, but at least we are busy, right? The world tells us to grind every day, wake up earlier, stay up later, work while everybody else is sleeping. Never stop hustling, never be satisfied, keep chasing the next promotion, next opportunity, next goal, the next dollar. They say push your body, ignore your limits, rest when you are finished, but the problem is that you are never finished. There's always another email to answer, another room to clean, another project to begin, another person to help, and another problem to solve. The grind promises success, but eventually the grind begins grinding down on you. It grinds down your health, your relationships, it grinds down your joy, your patience, it grinds down your ability to hear God. You become so accustomed to being tired that you no longer remember what rest feels like. You become so accustomed to being hurried that stillness makes you feel uncomfortable, like you have to have music or TV or something going on so you don't think about everything that you're worrying about. You become so accustomed to carrying pressure that you don't know who you are without something urgent that's demanding your attention. Now, burnout doesn't usually happen because somebody worked hard for one day. Burnout happens when someone lives without a healthy rhythm for a long time. It happens when we continuously withdraw strength without allowing God to restore what has been depleted. It happens when every day becomes a work day, every evening becomes an extension of the office, and every moment of silence is filled with a screen. Eventually, our bodies, our minds, our emotions, and our relationships, they begin paying the price for all the grind and the hustle we're doing. The world may call this ambition, but God calls it a refusal to accept the limitations He's placed on us. But there's another unhealthy pattern in the world. Some people don't struggle with working too much. Some people struggle with avoiding work. They talk about protecting their peace and entering a season of rest. They're waiting for motivation to do something, or they're practicing self-care, but sometimes those phrases are used to excuse laziness. They want the results of discipline without the discomfort of discipline. They want the harvest without the planting. They want the provision without the responsibility. They want purpose without having to sacrifice. They want rest, but they haven't done anything which they need to recover from. The Bible does not teach us to work ourselves to death, but it also doesn't teach us to avoid work either. The biblical pattern is not 7 days of hustle, and it's not 7 days of doing nothing. God created a rhythm of 6 days of meaningful work, followed by 1 day of intentional rest. To understand this, we have to go back to the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So the very first scripture, the very first verse in the Bible begins with God working. God creates light. He separated the waters. He creates land and vegetation, then the sun, the moon, the stars, and he fills the water and with living creatures in the sky with birds. And God creates animals, and then he creates humanity in his own image. And each day God creates, he orders, he fills, and forms. At the end of the day, God looks at what he has made and he says, and it is good. God's not working chaotically. He's not running around heaven overwhelmed because creation is behind schedule. I thought this was going to be done yesterday and it's going to take a couple more weeks. He is working intentionally. There is purpose in his work. There is order to how he created. There is joy in his work. Everything he did was good. Then Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, it says, "By the seventh day God had finished the work he had been doing, so on the seventh day he rested from all his work." God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. God rested. And that should get our attention immediately, because God wasn't tired. Isaiah says that God doesn't grow tired or weary. He didn't reach the seventh day exhausted and he's like, oh, I need a self-care day. God rested because the work was complete. And he was establishing a rhythm for humanity. Before sin, there was already work. Before the fall of mankind, there was already work. Before there was exhaustion, there was rest. Before there were bills, there's bosses, there's schools, there's school schedules, there's deadlines, there's smartphones. God built a rhythm into creation. 6 days of meaningful work and 1 day of rest. Now, rest is not a consequence of the fall. It's part of God's original design. It existed in Eden when everything was still good. So rest is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is actually something that's a sign that you are human. You are normal. You have limits because God created you with limits. You need sleep because God made you to need sleep. You need food. You need relationships. You need stillness. You need worship. You need rest because God made you need them. The world tells us that our limitations are weaknesses to overcome. But God uses our limitations to remind us that we are not God. We sleep every night because we cannot remain awake forever. You actually die if you stay awake for that long. Basically, you get so tired that your body just goes to sleep. You need sleep. Your body will make you sleep. No matter how important we believe we are, our jobs are, our purpose is, our bodies eventually force us to stop. Every night we close our eyes. We lose awareness of what's happening around us. We surrender control for hopefully 8 hours. The sleep is a daily confession that we are not God. When we sleep, we admit that the world can continue without supervision. We admit that problems can remain unresolved until tomorrow. We admit that God can keep our hearts beating while we are unconscious. Sleep says God can handle the next 8 hours without me. Sabbath says, God can handle this day without my labor. And both require trust. They require us to believe that stopping will not cause everything to collapse. They require us to believe that God is still working even when we are not working. And some of us really struggle to believe that. We say we trust God, but we live as though he needs our constant assistance. Like we are making sure God is on task. We act as though if we don't answer every message, we don't solve every problem, we carry every burden of everybody around us personally, everything is going to fall apart without us. And we might call that responsibility, but a lot of times it's pride. It's our personal pride. And sometimes our inability to rest comes from an exaggerated view of our own importance. We believe no one else can do the job as well as we can. We believe the family, the business, the church, the ministry, it cannot function without us. But God has not asked us to be indispensable. He asks us to be faithful. And faithfulness means doing what God has called us to do with the time and the strength that he has given us to do it in. Pride means believing everything depends upon our own ability to keep doing it and make it happen. And at some point, Sabbath forces us to face the truth. There is a God, and we are not him. The word Sabbath it literally means to stop or cease. Sabbath is not just slowing down while continuing to work. It's deliberately laying down our normal labor. And that can be very difficult because unfinished work has a way of shouting at us. Like you're sitting in there and you see all the laundry that needs folded. You see that email and that notification on your phone that needs answered. That project that you started is incomplete. That there are dishes in the sink. Something will always remain undone. And the Sabbath teaches us to leave something unfinished. Leaving something unfinished reminds us that our value is not determined by how much we complete. It reminds us that the world does not depend on our productivity. It reminds us that God can provide even when we are not producing something. And this is what God taught Israel in Exodus chapter 16. After leaving Egypt, the Israelites became hungry in the wilderness, and God responded by providing manna each morning. Now, was manna great to eat? No, it wasn't pizza. It wasn't a steak. It wasn't anything like great. And he instructed them to gather enough for each day rather than hoarding it. It is sustenance. And then on the sixth day, they were told to gather twice as much because there'd be no manna that would fall on the seventh day. This lesson was more than a lesson about scheduling. It was a lesson about trust. Could they believe what God provided on the sixth day would be enough? Could they remain at rest knowing there's no manna to gather on the seventh day? Could they trust that the God who provided yesterday would also provide again tomorrow? And some people couldn't. Exodus says that some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather manna, but they found none. They went looking for provision where God had told them there would be none. And we still do the same thing. It may not be manna, but God tells us to stop, but we keep gathering. We keep checking, we keep producing, we keep returning to work because we're not convinced that God has provided what he's given us will not be enough. The deepest question of Sabbath is not merely, are you tired? Because everybody is tired. The deepest question is, do you trust God? Do you trust God enough to stop earning for one day? Do you trust him enough to leave the email unanswered for a day? Do you trust him enough to allow someone else to handle the problem? Do you trust him enough to believe that your future is not entirely dependent upon your effort? Sabbath is faith practiced with our calendars. Because it's one thing to say God provides. You are Jehovah, you are the God who provides. It's another thing to close the laptop, to put down the tools, to turn off the phone, and live as if we believe it. Sabbath also reminds us that we are no longer slaves. When God repeated the Sabbath command in Deuteronomy, he connected it to Israel's deliverance from Egypt. In Egypt, Pharaoh controlled their time. Their worth was measured by the number of bricks they produced. When they struggled, Pharaoh demanded more production, more bricks, work harder, stop complaining, don't slow down. And our culture may not ask us to make literal bricks unless that's your job, but I doubt it. But it still measures our value by production. How much did you accomplish? How much did you earn today? How quickly did you respond? How productive were you? Pharaoh says your worth is what you produce, but God says you are mine and you are free. Sabbath is a weekly declaration of that freedom. Every Sabbath, Israel was reminded that Pharaoh no longer owned them, that their production did not determine their value. They belonged to God, and some of us have been delivered from Egypt, but we're still living as though Pharaoh is our boss. Jesus has set us free, but we remain enslaved to being productive. We can't sit still without feeling guilty. We can't enjoy our families because our minds are somewhere else. We have left Egypt, but Egypt has not left us. Sabbath confronts the voice that says we're only valuable when we're producing something. It reminds us that we are still loved when we accomplish nothing. God doesn't love the productive version of you more than the resting version of you. It's grace. And grace means receiving what we could never earn. The Sabbath trains us to stop earning, stop proving, stop striving, stop performing. We remember that our salvation is not the result of our work. It's not what we do. It's the result of Christ's work. And that doesn't mean work is bad. Work is good. Work existed before sin. The very first verse of the Bible. God created the heavens and the earth. Genesis said that God placed Adam in the garden to work it and take care of it. Work was part of paradise. God works and we're made in his image. We're supposed to create, we're supposed to build, repair, we teach, we serve, we lead, we protect, we provide, we care for others. And through faithful work, we reflect something of the God who created us. And Scripture honors hard work, but it warns against laziness. He says, Exodus chapter 20, verse 9, 6 days you shall labor, and do all your work. And we emphasize the command to rest on the seventh day, but the command also assumes 6 days of labor. And some people need to hear that rest is holy. Others need to hear that work is holy too. There are people who are exhausted because they never stop, and they need a day to rest. And there are people who are frustrated because they never begin anything. They're waiting for God to bless work they haven't done. They want a harvest, but they haven't planted. And you may call it rest, and sometimes it's really avoidance. It's fear, it's procrastinating, it's laziness, wearing spiritual language. Rest and laziness are not the same thing. Rest restores us for obedience. Laziness avoids obedience. 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. Laziness, it refuses faithful effort. Rest says, I have done what God has asked me to do, and now I trust him with what remains. Laziness says, I don't want to do what God has asked me to do. It refuses work, but the Sabbath refuses to worship work. Now, whether you're on the 6 days a week that you need to work, or you need to work on the 1 day a week for rest, both sides need correction. And to the person who never stops, God says your work is not your God. And to the person who never starts, God says your comfort is not your God. To one group, obedience looks like laying something down, and to the other, obedience looks like picking something up, to do some work. The goal is not to work as little as possible or as much as possible. The goal is to work faithfully and rest, trusting God. We work because our work matters. We rest because God is still in control when we stop working. And Jesus, he restores this balance in Mark chapter 2. Jesus says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And by this time, Jesus began his ministry. Religious leaders added rule after rule around the Sabbath. That it was like, you can't do this. You can't pick up your child. You can't cook any food. The gift of everything, they couldn't even stand up without it being like you're going against the Sabbath. And Jesus rejected that legalism without rejecting the Sabbath itself. He healed on the Sabbath. He showed mercy on the Sabbath. He restored the Sabbath to its intended purpose. But the Pharisees turned Sabbath into legalism. Modern culture has turned every day into a work day, and Jesus leads us away from both of the errors. A Sabbath is not simply doing nothing, because we can spend an entire day scrolling on our phones or watching TV, and guess what? We're still worn out. Rest is more than the absence of work. It is the presence of what restores us. Sabbath creates space for worship, for prayer, for scripture, for unhurried meals, to have family time, to be with friends, to laugh, to enjoy. It gives us time to walk outside and notice creation. We can breathe deep and remember God's goodness. It's not only about stopping what drains us, it's making room for what reconnects us to God and restores our souls. This may also require us to create boundaries around technology. Our phones allow work and news and conflict and comparison and entertainment and other people's expectations to follow us everywhere. The moment we become bored or uncomfortable or quiet, we reach for a screen. And Sabbath may reveal that we're not only busy, we're addicted to stimulation. My favorite verse in the whole Bible is Psalm 46:10. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." In the midst of all the wars and all the earthquakes and all the craziness happening, the chaos, God says, stop all that. Know that I am God. Stillness doesn't create God's presence. It helps us notice the God who has been present all along. The world tells us that we must remain connected to everything, but the Sabbath teaches us to reconnect with what matters most. We disconnect from being productive so we can reconnect with our identity, with Christ. We disconnect from constant communication so we can reconnect with the people sitting in front of us. We disconnect from the world's demands so we can listen to God. And it might feel weird, and people may not understand why you don't respond immediately, and you might feel guilty when you first stop, but this is where Romans 12:2 comes in. The world's pattern is 7 days of noise. There's pressure, there's productivity, there's consumption and distraction. But God's pattern is 6 and 1. 6 days to work faithfully, 1 day to rest trustfully. Sabbath is an act of nonconformity. It's a weekly rebellion against the lie that our value comes from being productive. It's a declaration that we are people. We're not machines. It's a confession that God's wisdom is better than the world's pressure. So let us return to the two groups. Because some of you need to hear God say, stop. It's okay. You've been carrying work stress and family responsibility and financial pressure. There's obligations and you have concern for the people you love. And you keep telling yourself you will rest when things calm down, but things never calm down on their own. There will always be another need, another task, and you may not need to become more efficient. You may need to become more obedient. You may be trying to do in 7 days what God intended you to do in 6. Your refusal to stop may not be faithfulness. It's fear, it's pride, it's an attempt to control the outcomes, but the outcomes belong to God. We're faithful to obedience. Choose a day, protect it. Stop your normal work. When do I work? I work on Sundays. Most people take Sundays off. I work on Sundays. Guess what my Sabbath is? Monday. You pick a day and Sabbath. Put away what continually pulls you back into the hustle. Worship God. Enjoy your family. Eat a good meal. Take a walk. Take a nap. Read scripture slowly. Let something remain unfinished. And when you see it, you're like, it's okay. Don't wait until your body forces you to stop before you honor the limits God gave you. Keep working and keep working. I always heard this. You're going to work yourself into a lather. Yeah, you're going to be worn out and your body's going to say you got to stop. It could either come as sickness or an injury. And your body's saying, slow down. You're not God. There's a difference between work and being busy. Work includes your job that you get paid to do, and it includes chores around the house. There's cooking, there's cleaning. I'm not saying you have to work at a job 6 days a week. Work 4 to 6 days a week. Work a full-time job. Work at the job. And then the other days that aren't work for your job is work for your family, your house. Do what needs done. If you're a stay-at-home parent, every day is a work day, and I get that. I was a stay-at-home parent for 2 years. But what the Sabbath is an abrupt change to your weekly pace. 1 day a week, stop everything that you can. All parents, take care of your kids every day of the week, okay? But maybe have leftover night for food instead of cooking. Change diapers. Please change diapers, okay? The Sabbath doesn't forbid changing diapers. The Sabbath doesn't forbid all work as modern Judaism proclaims, and says you can't even turn on a light switch. It's about an abrupt change of pace to your daily living. But other people may need to hear God say, instead of stop, he's saying start. You may have become comfortable avoiding responsibility. You may be asking God for provision while refusing to work faithfully. And you can call it rest, but it's actually being passive, procrastinating, you're afraid, or lazy. God made you to contribute. And there is work for you to do, responsibility for you to carry, gifts for you to develop and stop, and people for you to serve. And so God is saying, stop waiting until you feel motivated. Start. Get up. Apply for the job. Finish the assignment. Clean the room. Make the phone call. Show up on time. Keep your word. Use what God has given you. Some need to put the work down, but others need to pick the work up. Both require obedience. Working 6 days does not mean staying busy every moment. Now, busyness and faithful work are not the same thing, because I have seen people fill an entire week with activity but accomplish very little that was practical, anything that was meaningful, anything that was helpful. It's possible to answer messages, go to meetings, reorganize things, research ideas, and talk about what needs to be done while still avoiding the work that matters most. Busyness can even become a respectable form of procrastination. We should not measure faithfulness by how tired we feel or how full our calendars are. Sometimes we're exhausted because we worked hard, but other times we're exhausted because we're distracted all day. Also, just because you're doing something good doesn't mean it's the most important thing that you can do. You find the main best things and start to weed out the things that may be good, but just becomes busyness. Busyness is not the goal. In the creation story, God's work was purposeful. Each day moved creation forward. Biblical work does the same. It contributes, cultivates, serves, solves problems, creates order, develops what God has entrusted to us. Faithfulness is not doing everything. It's doing the right things with the time, the energy, the gifts, and responsibilities God has given us. The opposite of laziness is not busyness. The opposite of laziness is faithfulness. And for all of us, the invitation is the same. Trust God's rhythm. Work as though your work matters, because it does. Even if it's a job that you clock in, you clock out, and you feel like you're not doing anything, sometimes a job is just a job, and that's okay. And you're still working, and that's okay. But rest as though God is still in control, because He is. Sabbath doesn't teach us that our work is meaningless. It teaches us that our work is not ultimate. Our effort matters, but God's provision is greater. Our faithfulness matters, but the world does not rest on our shoulders, it rests on God's. God held the universe together before He arrived, and He will continue holding it together after we're long gone. He can certainly hold it together when He told us to take a day of rest. Sabbath is not simply a day where we stop working. It's a day when we stop pretending to be God. We lay down the pressure, we get rid of the control, we leave the unfinished task and the need to prove ourselves. When we say, God, I trust you. I trust that 6 days are enough when they are given faithfully. I trust that my identity is not found in what I produce. I trust that you can provide while I rest. I trust that your wisdom is better than the pattern of this world. Maybe the most countercultural thing you can do this week is not add something else to your life. Maybe it's to stop. Maybe the weird thing is turn off the phone. Leave the email unanswered. Gather around a table. Take a nap without feeling guilty. Worship without feeling rushed. Be fully present with the people God has placed in front of you. The easiest way to take a Sabbath is just do the opposite of what you do 6 days a week. If you're physically active at your job, the best Sabbath may just be lounge around, eat, read scripture. But if you got typing fingers like I do for 6 days a week, your Sabbath would be to do something physical. Go out in nature, go on a walk, work out, do chores around the house you've been meaning to get done for the last 6 days. For someone else, the weird thing may be to get up and work. Stop calling avoidance rest. Begin using the time, the strength, and gifts God has given you. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, it tells us that we are transformed by the renewing of our minds. And we need God to renew the way that we think about work and what we think about rest. We need Him to free us from the world's extremes and bring us back into His rhythm. Work faithfully, rest regularly, trust God completely, and the world says, remember this, the world says never stop. But God says, remember to stop for one day. Remember the Sabbath. The world says everything depends on you, but God says, be still and know that I am God. So what does obedience look like for you? Do you need to stop or do you need to start? Do you need to lay something down or do you need to pick something up? And whatever God is saying, do not conform to the pattern of this world, because the pattern of this world is exhaustion, it's burnt out, it's hustle, and do everything you can without trusting God. Trust His wisdom, receive the rhythm, work faithfully, and remember that God is still God even when you stop.